Oh, Queen Justice, where are you? Did they beat you up or no? Lock you underground, take the crown away from you?
Oh, Lady Liberty, red, white, and blue. Did they take your dignity with their bigotry? Teach you that you're born to lose.
Free or guilty, it's gonna get filthy. Better believe, roll up your sleeves. It's gonna get rough, it's gonna be tough. We all agree, we've had enough.
We've had enough of all the rules you break. We've had enough of all the money you make. We've had enough, no more life at stake. We've had enough, this is a proclamation. It's been 400 years and we're 400 late. Together we stand from state to state. Going back in time won't make America great. We need justice now, people won't wait.
Action, no more distraction. Every step we take, we gain traction. If it can happen to one, it can happen to all. United we stand, divided we fall. Free or guilty, it's gonna get filthy. Better believe, roll up your sleeves. It's gonna get rough, it's gonna be tough. We all agree, we've had enough.
We've had enough of all the rules you were breaking. We had enough of all the money you were making. We had enough, no more life gets taken. We had enough, this is a proclamation.
Free or guilty, it's gonna get filthy. Better believe, just roll up your sleeves. It's gonna get rough, it's gonna be tough. We all agree, we've had enough.
We've had enough of all the rules you're breaking. We had enough, all the money you're making. We've had enough, no more life gets taken. We've had enough, this is the proclamation.
We've had enough. Trayvon Martin and Tommy Rice. We've had enough. Michael Brown and Eric gonna pay the price. We've had enough. Philando, Breonna, George Floyd. What? We've had enough. So many gone. How can we fill the void?
How can we feel?
We've had enough. John Crawford, I know you've heard. We've had enough. Sandra Bland, come on and take a stand. We've had enough. Sean Bell, what the hell? We've had enough. Freddie Gray, did you hear what I said? We've had enough.
This is a proclamation.
I'm Al McFarlane. Welcome to Conversations with Al McFarlane. Glad to be here and glad to have you along as well. Thank you for checking in with us, tuning in. Victoria, I see you there. How are you? You're muted. You're muted.
Yes, I'm good. Thank you.
Well, thank you for joining the conversation. I want to say to our viewers and listeners, we do this every day, 5 days a week. Mondays, we dedicate to community organizations, neighborhood block club meetings. Last Monday, we had a conversation that had to do with the redistricting, and we want to follow that issue because it's an important issue. Redistricting in the city of Minneapolis, who votes where and who gets elected is largely driven by, is actually driven by where the boundaries are. And the commission responsible for that, the Charter Commission of Minneapolis, will decide how to divide up the city into 13 roughly numerically equal wards. But numerically equal and how the lines are drawn, two different things. And in the past, the process is called gerrymandering. Politicians would easily draw people into boundaries that basically guaranteed powerlessness. What do you mean? Mean that, say, you lived on the corner of Plymouth and Penn in North Minneapolis, and for 20 blocks in either direction was a neighborhood full of Black people. Well, this is just an example. It's not true at all, but the kind of thinking that is reflected by this process of gerrymandering is that they would divide the ward, those 20 square blocks of Black people into 3 different groups. And so 1/3 would go one way, 1/3 would go the other way, 1/3 go the third way. All 3 would be a powerless unit inside of a white majority. Black people would not have a person elected or electable because their numbers were therefore diluted. So, where you vote is important. Voting districts are important, and the process for assigning the boundaries every 10 years based on the census is important too. So we hope that today, not today so much, but in the Mondays ahead, to bring people to you to talk about redistricting so that you're aware, that your voice is heard. You can provide comment to the Charter Commission so that they make an informed decision that reflects your interests. We're going to also work with the Council on Black Minnesotans. It's now called the Council on Minnesotans of African Heritage. And our intent there is to use our Monday program to reach out to both elected legislative officials, Blacks in the House of Representatives and the Senate, Bobby Joe in the Senate, and the House of Representatives, to create a pipeline, a conduit, so that you can be on top of, attuned to the priorities, the issues that they're dealing with on your behalf, so that they can hear from you about what you want our state to do and be. How do you want the multi-billion-dollar surplus spent? I think the number was $6 billion, unheard of budget surplus projected. And in years past, if we are silent, people in the Iron Range will get what they need. People in Southwest Minnesota will get what they need. But the question is, how do we get what we need? How do Black people get our share of our money, the budget to fix our community? So that's kind of the idea. Pleased to have joining me today is Alicia D. Smith. She is the executive director of Corcoran Neighborhood Association, a former YMCA official and a successful candidate in the last election, running for the Minneapolis Park Board at large. Alicia, how you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you, Mr. McFarlane?
Doing good. Please call me Al. Do you know Victoria Dooley? Do you know Victoria?
I do not know Victoria.
Victoria, I think you're with one of the neighborhood associations in North
Hawthorne.
Minneapolis. Hawthorne. You and I talked last time.
Yes.
Thank you for being here. And usually Diana is here. So maybe Diana asked you to.
Yes, she did. She asked me to fill in.
I appreciate it. Well, she's always on top of the case, and I thank her and I thank you. Hawthorne has been our constant partner in creating this series of conversations. So your presence, Victoria, absolutely appreciated and essential. And you've been on a couple of these programs. What we do is just talk. We just talk.
Yes, I know.
And it's a conversation. But Alicia, congratulations. You know what now? Your light is not great. I don't know if you can put more light on the front or not. You sound is great, but your light is not perfect.
Yeah, the light is terrible in my office.
Okay.
It's overhead. I got this little spotlight. Let's hope
that's okay. We'll get by without it.
It might be the brim of my hat too. So I'm having a bad hair day.
Well, you look great. Congratulations on your election. Talk about being elected to the park board and what it means to you, what it means for the city.
Well, I'm super excited, super honored, and extremely thankful and grateful for the folks that cast their vote of sort of faith in me, essentially, to be responsible as one of the leaders of the park board. And so it's truly an honor for me to be able to serve. And, we just began the orientation for the new commissioners. And so I am looking forward to learning the intimate details about being a park commissioner and how to impact change immediately, and how to see some wins and have not only my legacy, but the legacy of my other counterparts cemented in truly changing how the parks are utilized and who utilizes them, really putting forth a park system that is truly accessible for all, not just in words, but in action. And so I'm looking forward to really being able to have an impact there and, serving as the only Black member of the park board is going to be my role. And so being able to bring the voice of not only that of the Black community, but also other people of color in their interactions with the park that have been pleasant and not so pleasant, and where we sort of get the short end of the stick, just because sometimes the way systems work, they don't consider all folks. And so I'm excited to be able to do that, and also being intentional about not being tokenized as the only person of color on the board. So in particular, just as a Black woman. And so I'm really looking forward to bringing my expertise and my experience to the table.
Tell what happened. We had, I think, 3 people on the board before: Latricia Vital, the other 2.
We had Latricia, Londell French, and AK Hassan.
Yeah, AK and Londell. And so AK and Londell were defeated. But talk about the entire dynamic that resulted with nobody among the incumbents staying on the board, and you being successful in winning a seat.
Yeah. So it's really interesting, because I absolutely just knew that Londell was a shoe, and he had so many people who just loved not only him as an individual, but the work and the advances that he made in his time on the parks. And so it was really interesting, because Londell was probably the only candidate of the 3 people of color that I knew that was attempting to return, because of course Latricia Vital was running for city council. And so I knew that her race was no longer about the parks, but really about her work as becoming our next city council person. And so I just assumed, just based on even being out on the campaign trail, when I would run into people and attempt to convince folks to cast me as their number 1 choice, they would say, "Oh, I'm voting for Londell." And so then, of course, my response is, then will make me your number 2. And we just had a good slate of candidates. In particular, we had a good slate of just Black candidates who were running, and other really great candidates when we talk about looking to have an impact on our parks and what the parks mean for the city. And so it was quite the shock to see that it was just me elected. And we're dealing with majority of women board, so that will be really interesting in and of itself. There are 2 men on the park this year, two men on the park board. So 2 park board commissioners who are men, Billy Menz and Tom Olson. And so I think it'll be really interesting, and just the age demographic and the number of commissioners who actually have children that are of age that maybe utilize the park. So it is quite the interesting dynamic when we think about the leadership that has made up the park board in the past. And so I'm really looking forward to that, because I have 2 young sons who use the park every single day. And so being an active parent to 2 children who are under the age of 13 that utilize the parks is extremely critical to me.
Victoria, let me ask you to jump in. What do the parks mean to us as community, as residents, as homeowners or renters, as a community activist, from your sense in the Hawthorne organization? How important is it to have parks that really reflect the idea that we belong in it, and that the parks belong to us as well? What do you think, Victoria?
I think that the parks are just like they're very important. I mean, not just for us, but also for our youth and for our aging individuals. I mean, it's just very important for all of us all around. I mean, before school, after school, somewhere to go, somewhere to engage, somewhere to belong. I mean, somewhere to just go and, like, I remember that the older people would go to the park and they'd have their own little space and they'd come and meet, and it gets out of the house. And as I've gotten older and I look for things to do because I'm no longer working, and I look for places to go. I'm going to the YMCA now, but I used to love to go to the park and watch the youth play and think about how I used to be able to do those things and support them. And then to take my grandchildren and say, hey, this is something positive for you to do. A place for the young men to come and get off the street, the young girls to come and learn things. They had cooking part of it. And I mean, it was just very important all around for growth and, for the community. And just, I just thought it was very important. It is very important that we still have those, and that the programs and stuff that they offer reflect what is needed by that community. I mean, each community is made up of different races of people, and so we kind of, our cultures differ, and so we have interest in different areas. So it's very important to me that those parks reflect the needs of those communities, what's needed in those communities, and offer that. It's very important that those that are over the parks, like on the park boards, know these things and know what we need, so that they know how to get it to us. It's very important to know what you need, opposed to this whole big scope of this, that, or the other, to kind of more individualized, like working with Diane. She says, well, they focus on parks as a whole, but we have to customize our park to what is needed by the people in our community and let them know. And so that's kind of what's important. That's very important to me. Also, I learned that working with her, because I always thought of just us, but it's not just us. It's all of us.
Right.
And so, and I mean, when we all have what we need, we all work better together, because we're happy. We're not pulling and pushing on one another, because all of our needs are being met. So it's just important to me that my community has what it needs in its park, as it is for those over South and the Latino, or those over, that they're also in the Somalian communities, because we're all needing different things. We all have some of the things that we need that are the same, but we also have things that are different. And we need to be able to express that to you all, so that hey, this is what this, and so that everybody is not just put in one big clump, but everybody is getting also those individual needs met as well.
I'm Al McFarlane. This is Conversations with Al McFarlane. Our Monday session focuses on civic engagement. We typically work with colleagues, leaders at neighborhood organizations. My colleagues here in the Monday show are the leaders over at Hawthorne Neighborhood. Victoria Dooley here is representing the Hawthorne Neighborhood Association. Typically, we have Diana Hawkins, who's executive director, on board. So we thank them. Alicia Smith, sort of a dual role here. She's been our conduit and contact and lead with the Corcoran neighborhood, and really connecting us to the other contiguous neighborhood associations in South Minneapolis, including the Central Neighborhood Association and the Powderhorn Neighborhood Association, and others around there. But now Alicia, and still congratulating her, has been elected to an at-large seat on the board of the Minneapolis Park Board. Let me tell you two personal park stories that put in context the direction of the conversation that I want you to respond to, Alicia. Okay. One is that when I first came to Minneapolis from Worthington, Minnesota, where my family had moved to from Kansas City, and my brother and I were up here, and my brother wanted to go somewhere. I thought he said on Plymouth Avenue. I was here first. He came up. So I got in the car. I lived in St. Paul at the time, and I drove on Plymouth Avenue west from Glendale, kept going and going and going. And we just weren't sure where his friend lived. We drove west to past Thomas, which is where I live now, and Xerxes, and around the bend. And then when we got around the bend, I saw this huge building, the Chalet. I think people are familiar with the Chalet in North Minneapolis. Well, this was like 19, maybe 68, 69. It's been a bit. Alicia, you wasn't born yet, I don't think. You probably weren't born yet. 68, 69. So when I pull around this curve and see, green golf greens and this huge, impressive castle-like edifice there, my first impression, Alicia and Victoria, you might know this too, is panic. I said, oh snap, white neighborhood. My first impression was, oh snap, where am I? Danger, danger. Well, this is probably a white neighborhood, and where I grew up in Kansas City.
Yeah.
You know, when you were out of your neighborhood, out of your territory, not out of, uh, from black to white, you were
You got
in
back
danger.
with
You didn't have a reason to be there. So that was one impression. That was coming, looking at Worth Park, the chalet at Worth Park. And I've told that story a few times. And the question I raise is, why should I feel that? And it wasn't that I had any
Mhm.
particular personal experiences. I just knew from the environment I grew up in that there was a potential of catastrophe or embarrassment or of questioning who I was. And so, what's the lesson here? The lesson is, how come a 23, 22, 19, 21-year old Al McFarlane did not feel a sense of ownership,
Hmm.
a sense of empowerment?
Mhm.
Why did I not feel that this could possibly belong to me and that I could exercise lordship, control, access
Right.
freely? So that's the question
Mhm.
number one. The question number two, story number two, is back to Kansas City. When I grew up in the neighborhood I grew up in, 28th in Brooklyn, 32nd Indiana, but in my grade school years uh, and family years, we had certain days that we could go. Two things: certain days they would allow us to go to the amusement park. They would allow the schools, the black schools, to take busloads of kids out to Fairyland, like Valley Fair. But one day a year, that was the Black Day, and we went two or three times when I was in elementary school. But by the time my group was in seventh, eighth grade, we were moving into the protest area, and we said, you know what? If we can't go here every day, we ain't going at all. We started boycotting the Fairyland. So that was one thing. But the second part of the story is that I just remember growing up, and the big park in St. Paul that's like the Worth Park system here, or the Como Park system here, it's called Swope Park. And Swope Park had one shelter, shelter number 5, where all the black people went all the time and where you felt comfortable and safe. But there were probably 20 other shelters, that we were not safe at. So I'm saying all that to talk about the context. Where are we now? And how do
Mhm.
we create, Alicia, a system that genuinely tells and demonstrates to every citizen of our city, you are the owner here. This belongs to you. We exist to support quality of life in your family and for you. What do you think, Alicia Smith?
Well, I think one, it's a really big task because unfortunately, what you mentioned is still very much commonplace. Like that is still feelings that many people that look like us have when we go into certain areas or certain parks where there is this fear of what will go wrong, even though I'm doing nothing wrong. And
Mm-hmm.
so we have been over criminalized, right? And this is the danger of white supremacy, is that it has you always living from this space of survival,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then it has people looking at you as if you are this extraordinary human being, right? That there is no way that you could just be at the park enjoying whatever activities with your family, but instead there must be some sort of sinister plot here. And so I know we have to get to a place where we create a culture of getting used to seeing people who look different from those who maybe have built this system or maybe who frequent this park on a daily basis being in those spaces. Like we have to be comfortable and uncomfortable enough to say, okay, well, I see Miss Victoria maybe with her entire family out over here in Southwest Minneapolis at a park where historically what we see is maybe, our brothers and sisters of the lighter shade of skin frequenting the park every day. And so now people are looking at Victoria and her family maybe going, well, I wonder what they're doing out here. What business do they have here? Are these people moving into our neighborhood? Unfortunately, that is a real reality here in Minneapolis. We are the land of 10,000 lakes, but also we are the land of 10,000 microaggressions. And so we must realize that. And so I think what we have to do is continue to stress the importance not only to the staff, but also to one another. Like, we have to acknowledge the humanity in one another. And the problem is that people that look like us, this is unfortunately an exclusive thing that Black people wrestle with, is that people don't look at us and see our humanity first. We suffer the isms from every angle. We certainly fight alongside lots of people, and we certainly have proven many a times that we are committed to humanity existing. However, we have not been given that same level of grace. And so we must, from a systematic perspective, build that out in our culture to make it so normal as when you walk into a business that someone is greeting you, that this is normal, whether you've never seen a Black person at your park or out at these skiing at these, these hills, or tubing, or at this park or wherever. We have to normalize people who maybe look different than those who have everyday usage, and those who may be experiencing and exploring, because the park system is for all of us. It is to everyone's benefit. It is to the health not only of the individual using it, but also to the health of our cities. It's
right.
so critical.
That's right.
Let me read a couple of paragraphs from a Star Tribune article on the election. And this one happens to talk about Tom Olson in particular. Quoting him, I'll share what the author's name was in a minute. Open quote, "Obviously, we are very white, and barring me, I think fairly old. So in some ways, we aren't representing a lot of important demographics in the city," said incoming at-large Commissioner Tom Olson. "That's something I'm very conscious of." The article goes on to say Olson won his first shot at elected office after working several campaigns behind the scenes. He's an environmental advocate who intends to resurrect the Hiawatha Golf Course Master Plan, a water management strategy that was scuttled after members of the Black community rose up in opposition to reducing the historic 18-hole course to 9. That's flashpoint one, I think. What's going to happen there? I mean, you walking into a hornet's nest, I believe, or not you, but they are. And so the question is, here's the big question. You mentioned, was it 9 commissioners? 7?
Yes.
7 women, 2 men.
Mm-hmm.
8 whites, 1 person of color, 1 Black woman. You. So what are your thoughts about what we will discover about allyship? This will be the supreme test of allyship, I believe, because as a skeptic, this is Al McFarlane, a skeptic and a critic of the strategy, my skepticism says that white people going to be white before they anything else. And I can't count on white people to do what's right because it's right to do. I count on them to do right when they have to, when they're forced to, when they have no other choice. But given no other choice, they will not do what is right for the entire public. They sacrifice our interest. And as you said, Alicia, they have trained themselves not to recognize that we are humans, human beings. So how are you going to navigate this question of creating alliances, strategies that depend on allyship, white people siding with you and your point of view? And ought we expect something different from white women rather than from white men? Big question. What do you think?
Oh, that is a question, Mr. McFarlane. You're not taking it easy at all. I think, and I know that unfortunately this is very commonplace. I can't say that I've been in a space where I have yet to be the only. And so I've learned the hard way how to navigate these spaces when we are low in numbers and low on humility, um, that impacts the broader community. And so I don't think that I would not say that we could expect anything different from white women than we can from white men. I think that the danger of white supremacy tells us that this is embedded in who they are. And so the question then becomes, how many people are willing to fall on their swords for the greater good of humanity? And that is where I'm going to be searching for alignment with my fellow commissioners, is that, are you willing to fall on your sword to advance racial equity and access when we talk about the parks and the system, and not just serve lip service because it sounds good and it's the right thing to say, and you don't want to be seen as a racist, right? Because there is nothing more offensive than to be called a racist. People, you can call folks all sorts of nasty
Mhm.
words, but you say that R word, it's like they've died. And so the reality of it is that we have to figure out who's willing to fall on their sword. And that's true allyship. Like I'm not looking for anything else. I don't want anything less. Like I want you to fall on your sword to say, these communities have been wronged, and so wrong that they no longer are even on the narrative. Like we say it in words, but we do not display in action. Right. And that's what we do a lot of here, right? It's buried in Minnesota Nice, or we buried it in diversity and inclusion, but we don't really have action behind it. And so really I'm looking for action. And I think the quote that you read by Thomas, one that like I've been sandblasted with by lots of reporters, like, well, what do you think about this? Well, I think that Tom Olson is 27, and at 27, someone who's worked with elected officials for most of their career and sits on the People of Color Caucus feels a certain type of way, and that perspective isn't wrong. Like the board is very white, and by all means older, and because at 27 he's the youngest. So and so there, even there's a significant gap between he and I in terms of age. But at the end of the day, you are still a young white male. Predicated, your success falls on the very same things that you are saying that you're fighting for. The reason that you may find yourself successful is because of your outward appearance and how you show up. And so then the question becomes, are you brave enough, and are you willing to take the hit to advance this equity that you say you desire, this world that you desire, where your children, when you decide to have them or not, may grow up and marry someone who looks like me or looks like you, and then make their own family. So now you're dealing with this. I sat in a meeting, and I can't remember where I was, and there was a white woman on the call, and she said the most insane thing I'd ever heard. She literally was telling me she is the last white person in her family, and she was struggling with this because of how she was raised. And I still am trying to wrap my mind around like this idea. This woman had to be in her 60s, and so for her to recognize that her legacy of whiteness is coming to an end, and now she has this multiracial family, was hard for her. She loved her children, her grandchildren, but she was struggling with being the last living white person in her family.
That's
And
amazing.
that in and of itself is telling for so many reasons. And so I think that when we talk about having allies, it's not just about being my ally on paper or standing beside me at a protest. Like, are you going to fall on your sword? We've seen many
If
people
need
do
be.
so, but are you willing to do that, to say that like I'm I'm willing to give my life to advance the true equity of all people in our city, in our country. We have to start now or it won't ever happen.
Take a minute, if you would, Alicia, Commissioner-elect Alicia, and and sort of unpack to the degree you're able what the issues were with the golf course. Some people around town might not be familiar. In fact, we've got listeners from around the country who don't know Minneapolis. So, but I'm sure the principles involved are principles that we experience anywhere in the country.
Yeah.
If you can unpack that, and then you might want to also think back to the controversy that preceded it, and that was the controversy around the Martin Luther King Park and the effort by some progressive community members to create a dog park inside the Martin Luther King Park, and how that met with resistance from the Black community. So talk about
Yeah.
both things.
So as far as like the golf course goes, there for folks who may or may not know, there are a bevy of environmental issues there that have an impact on the immediate neighborhood and the people who live close by. There's some flooding, and then there are just some land implications that just this global crisis we talk about global warming is having on everything, and Minneapolis is not exempt from that, and the golf course isn't either. So it was built on a wetland, and so that in and of itself causes some problems. But being that it is the only in the Midwest, the only African American golf course that many of the Black golfers have ever been able to take part in, that's what makes it a historic landmine, right? A landmark. And we talk about the importance of having African American history preserved and our spaces preserved and not being relegated to a plaque, right? Because oftentimes this is what we'll see. It'll say, oh, well, we'll honor the history and the legacy of this space with a marker or with a plaque or by naming, maybe the wetlands or the hills after it. And we don't really take the necessary steps to truly honor that legacy and to truly be about our commitment to equity with action, right? With land. And so there are remediations that can happen to help cut down on the flooding and the other impacts that the golf course has as a result of rain and what we get 6 months out of the year, snow all the time, that we can do. There are certainly ways that we can do that and still maintain the original 18 holes of that golf course. And some of the immediate neighbors, oddly enough, when I was out campaigning, were all for it. They just don't want their basements to flood. Mm-hmm. And so they would like to see some remediation there or to have some guarantees there. And then we talk about the pollution and the trash that gets down in the lake. And so there's a bevy of things that are going wrong, but there are also a bevy of solutions that many people in our communities that are much more well versed on these things than I am have put forth or offered to try on a trial basis. And so really some of it is about manpower and cost. The first thing that is always brought up is that it's not a revenue generated space. Mm-hmm. And as we all know, that COVID has showed us that golf has certainly made a comeback, not only for the sake of sport, but also for the sake of being active and being outside, because it is a sport in which you can do in small groups or you can do alone. And so it keeps you active on a regular basis. And so we're talking about many of children who look like you and I that have had their first experiences at Hiawatha Golf Course. We're talking about working class people that can go up to the golf course and have an experience. We're also talking about the multi-purpose use of the golf course in the wintertime. And so I think we really have to figure out how do we remediate the environmental implications that we're dealing with, but also truly honoring the importance of the legacy, especially in a place where we talk about a state like Minnesota, where Black history is oftentimes just completely erased off the map and smudged so far that you never would have even known. And so we have to do right by our community and by the legacy of African Americans in the state. And the golf course is really one of those things that we can do that by. And especially, we talk about the last 2 years that we've had. You're following the unrest of George Floyd. And so you're saying all of these different things. You've had Tiger Woods up at, Hiawatha Golf Course dedicating the building. And so there are ways and there are people that support it and will potentially throw their funding behind it so that the parks don't eat the cost completely. But then we have to leverage those relationships and be true about our intent.
So think that back to 3-4 years ago when the controversy was over at the Martin Luther King Park on Nicollet Avenue. A lot of people took that kind of as a cultural affront, a slight, one of the 10,000 microaggressions, but macroaggression, because they thought that it was insensitive
Yeah.
for white neighbors to say, "Oh, we want to turn the namesake of Dr. King into a place for our dogs to run freely and roam freely, create a dog park." Review that with us, if you would, if you remember that.
I remember it vaguely. I just remember sitting in a lot of meetings with Black elders and elders of color being appalled at the audacity to, turn MLK Park into a dog park. And in it, hearing the cause of privilege that was showing up. This was about people taking advantage or prioritizing animals over the legacy of someone like Dr. King. That was a big deal. I remember very, very vividly hearing folks say, well, it's not that. Dogs are really important. And these are like our children. And it's not to devalue. We're going to keep up the park and those sorts of things. And I also remember hearing elders say, it's not about that. This is about the legacy of someone so great that we continue to try to minimize, not only just here in the city, but just all across the globe, and how we try to minimize the legacy of MLK and what he's meant and the work that he's done for not only civil rights, but human rights. And the level of disrespect that people felt was so great. And it was just sort of like, there are so many other places where we could have a dog park, but it never came up. It was just sort of like, nope, yes, we can maybe put a dog park 2 blocks away, but we don't want it 2 blocks away. We want it right here because this is where we've decided that we want it. And I think that it was another case of, again, Minnesota nice. This is what we want. You can either give it to us or we'll take it. And of course, we know the plight of Americans and their pets over people. We've seen that play out even with with Michael Vick and his situation with the NFL.
Mm-hmm.
And we're talking about there have been countless Black men and brown men and Black women and brown women, people of color, murdered like dogs in the street. And we don't see the level of outrage that we seen when Michael Vick's posse or crew was in this like sort of scandal with the dogs. It wasn't even the athlete himself, but he was sort of vilified as a result and lost his career as a result of that. And the level of outrage that we saw during that time versus the level of outrage that we see when we see Black bodies and brown bodies dropping in the street at the hands of whether it's the police or just violence in general, the outrage is not the same. There is certainly a value that feels, and this is me personally speaking, that people value, white people in particular, people in power, and we're talking about the systemic power dynamic, their pets over that of a Black body.
Mm-hmm.
There is no comparison in my eyes, whether it's a little, white baby, brown baby, Black baby. I see a child, and I'm not going to choose the life of an animal over that of a child ever. It just wouldn't be a thing to me, and I shall not compare the two as if they're the same.
It wouldn't even be a question.
But I am also not a pet owner, and so so people who say those things, I can't immediately identify as a parent, and just as a human being, I can't see myself comparing the lives or the treatment of the two the same. But yet every single day we do, and we see the value, and the scales don't tip the same. They don't tip the same. They do not at all. And so we have to get to a place where we acknowledge these things when we talk about moving the needle in terms of equity, again, it comes down, again, it's about the lack of humility and humanity that is seen in us, right? When you're not seen as a human being, people can disregard you as less than an animal.
Mm-hmm. Victoria, what do you think? It's an interesting conversation. I'm so thankful for Alicia's willingness to share her thoughts on touchy, difficult, but timely topics, things we have to all be thinking about. As you hear this conversation, what ideas are crossing your mind, or what experiences are you remembering, Victoria?
Well, my system kind of blanked out for a minute, so I missed some of it, but I am a firm believer in the law of attraction and that self-fulfilling prophecy, and that we kind of bring to ourselves those things that we expect. And so I think we as a people, when we go into these places, like you said, Al, why did you feel like you could not own such a place, or why you did not belong way back then? And like she said, they're gonna if they treat you or talk to you like you are less than, or less than a dog or an animal, that you kind of think or feel that way about yourself. And I kind of don't, because I always raise mine as in, you're the best, regardless of what somebody else thinks or what somebody else says. I mean, I don't know where religion fits in this at, but I am a believer, and I am what God says I am. I am fearfully and wonderfully made. And I teach my children, they're the same thing. You are born of kings and queens. And that's just kind of where I am, because people will tell you what they want you to think or what they want you to believe about yourself. But what really matters is what you think and what you believe about yourself and what you believe you're entitled to. Like you said, why can't, what, these are our parts, you know, they're for us. The money that funds them is for us. And so that's kind of where I'm at. And yes, it's true. I'm not to where I don't understand how the world or the system is today, and how there is still try to keep you under my foot sort of ordeal going on there. But I also look at, we're moving. We're moving. We're moving and we're fighting. And it's not just the older ones that are standing, but I see our youth coming up and they're standing. Because as the song, as they were saying in the beginning, enough's enough. We're tired. And it's not just us, it's us.
Victoria,
and I see that.
Where are you from, Victoria? Are you from Minneapolis? Are you from here?
I'm from Arkansas. I'm from the South.
Okay.
And so, yeah.
Oh, yeah. You know then.
Yes, I do. Very well.
Here, Alicia,
I know very well. I know very well. Yes, I do.
Yes. Yeah. No, I'm not. I grew up here, Mr. McFarlane. I've been here since I was 14, so I've been here longer than I've been alive. So this is my home, and I've used the parks my entire life, like since I've been here. That's where I made my first friends, playing basketball in North Commons.
That's right.
I think it's like, it's so critical. I do think that we are at a pivotal time as a city, and I think that when we talk about the election that just occurred and the fact that this city council has 2 years, and we have now like one of the most powerful mayors across the country with his newly appointed powers, we are at a place where we literally can make significant change to the lives of not only the people of color in the city, but to the policies that impact the people of the city. And so I think that we have a fairly, like, extremely diverse city council that was just elected.
I think eight of the 13 are people of color. So let me ask you, what do you expect from that? Now, I raised the question of 8 of 9 being white. Right?
Yeah.
Now here's a question of 8 of 13 being people of color. Never happened before in Minneapolis. And obviously nobody's going to presume that just because they're all people of color, they're going to think the same way or see things the same way. or that they won't have differences, or they might have and reflect different priorities, like you said, Victoria, of
Mm-hmm.
different constituents,
Mm-hmm.
and sometimes the person in Cedar Riverside who's Black might not have the same end game on certain policy issues as somebody in Fourth Ward or Fifth Ward in North
That's right.
Minneapolis.
That's right.
But still, for the first time, 8 of 13, the majority, people of color. What do you expect could happen? Because I think you kind of primed this question by saying we've got a new dynamic, one we've never had before, with power unleashed at the mayor's office, but new leadership combination, configuration in city council.
Yeah. I think I'm expecting I'm expecting devastating change from this group of leaders.
Mm.
Right? Not only because many of them identify as people of color, but also because the mayor and what he said verbally in terms of his commitment to communities of color. And so I think that when you have such a diverse group of people who will not at all think the same. Many of them will have different of opinions, even those that agree on many things, that have different strategies to get it done.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
I think the commitment to actually getting it done is what I'm looking forward to from this group as they build their relationship with the mayor. You have to remember that some of these folks didn't support Jacob, and they were very open about not supporting him. And so now, as all newly elected leader and some returning leaders, how are you going to work together to put aside your personal differences, your own personal political agenda, to move the needle for the
Mm-hmm.
people of this city who have been forgotten and left to figure it out on their own? How do we do that with the new dynamic that the mayor has all of this power, and essentially as a new city council member, you can't even really carry on a conversation with the department head? And so how do I build a relationship and have diplomacy with the mayor to get things done, not only for the people that I represent in my council, like, but also the people of the city across the board? Because certainly the issues of my friends in North Minneapolis are different than mine's in the eighth ward where I
Mm-hmm.
live. I live in the eighth ward, and my friends who live in the fourth and fifth are facing different issues. Some of them are the same, but many of them are different.
Very different.
Their need is immediate. They need
Mm-hmm.
to see immediate like ramifications and immediate like remediation of certain issues. And so I'm looking forward to them finding a commonality of advancing the people, in particular people of color who have had it extremely terrible. With the fact that Minneapolis and St. Paul continues to fall in the top three of every deficit type of model
Yeah.
for anything as it relates to people of color continues to baffle me in such a rich place. And so I expect that city council will be able to address some of these things and put some actual policy in place, but to go a step further than policy, to actually put the dollars behind it, because we know
That's
there's
right.
been a great disinvestment in these programs and in these policies. So now I'm looking for the money to flow through so that the work can actually be done.
How old are your sons, Alicia? I think you lost you're frozen. Maybe to refresh your camera. If I get Alicia back, but I'll talk to you, Victoria. I was interested in the train of thought about being a person of faith and what that meant and how you imparted or trained, invested in your children, an idea that sustains them, right? And that validates your sense of dignity and your sense of equity. And so I want to close with that discussion and ask two things. Just ask you, Victoria, to talk more about that. How and look at what you have done with your children, but also look at the crisis we have in our community
Mm-hmm.
with young people, uh, being, well, some of them feeling left out and
Mhm.
becoming criminalized,
Yes.
at the same time, maybe we're giving too much attention to that and not enough attention to all the broad number of other successful, positive-minded children. How do we not look at the crisis bound children? And let me say this the right way. We have to look at them.
That's right.
We have to work with them, but we cannot forget everybody else. And we can't let the crisis be the definition for the entire class, because it's
That's
not.
right. That's right.
So I'm asking you that as a parent, what your thoughts are. And I asked you before your screen locked up on us, Alicia, how old are your boys? And how do you do that as a parent? How do you do that? Keep them centered and positive and protected, but also believing in their own right and responsibility to exercise both sovereignty and equity in our society. Victoria first, and we'll close with Alicia.
Well, I guess I was raised that way myself. Like I said, I was from the South, and I saw a lot of racial inequality there. I mean, coming up, it was when my mother moved us up here, up further to the north, that, you know what, I didn't really even know any Caucasian people. It was predominantly African American in my neighborhood. Mm-hmm. But I also knew that the big
were you in Little Rock? Were you in Little Rock or somewhere else?
That's right. You know it. Little Rock, and then a small town named Wilmot. If you blink, you'll miss it. But yes, like I said, my mother raised us up in the church, and so when I had children of my own, I raised them up in the church, and of course, you know, they get away from it, but they remember. Mm-hmm. They remember the strong work ethic. They remember the Lord and where their help comes from. But I see so many youth out there that don't have that, and I see the path that they've taken, and I can't help but wonder if that is a missing dynamic in their life, because if you don't know that you do have that to fall back on, that you do have a family that is not necessarily out there in that street. You can have a family in the church that is outside of the world, but if you have not been introduced to that, then you don't know that. And because I got lost in the world myself coming up, but because my mother raised me in the church, I knew where I could go to. Mm-hmm. And if our youth don't hear that, they don't hear about those who are doing well and who have this work ethic, then all they hear about is the youth on the street, and they're in gangs, and they're breaking in cars, and they're doing that. And this is what we're talking about. They need to hear about those that are doing well, those that are grown up, strong in their family,
the scholars, the artists,
and raising their children and working job. And they're still out there, and they're fighting the same battle that we are. We're fighting it together, but they're fighting it on a more positive level. You can be part of the solution or part of the problem. And though you're fighting with us, you're also the problem because of how you're choosing to live your life. Right. And so we're wanting to show you that there's something else as well, so that you know that you have a choice. And I think it's important that they know that.
Yeah. Alicia, jump in. Let's wrap it up with this.
So my boys are 12 and 8. And the way that I bring them up is to be good humans, but also, unfortunately, I slowly have to chip away at their innocence as little Black boys, because at some point they will not be cute to the rest of the world, and they will be intimidating young Black men. And so raising them with the sense of humility, but also to recognize the humanity in everyone, is super important to me. And also the reality is that there are people in the world that are fighting to survive. And while they may not feel that fight in their age because they have a mother who has a career, and we live in a house and we have our needs met, there are some of their friends that may not have that same thing. Some of their families are piecemealing things together, and some of their friends may go hungry. And so recognizing there are opportunities for them to also add value to other people's lives, but understanding that there are also some common experiences that we have. And then how do we fight to correct the wrongs? And so it's about teaching them how to be brave enough to stand up when they know something is wrong, even if they're scared. Like, even if your knees are shaking, but you heard your teacher say something inappropriate to a friend, you may not have the courage right then in that moment to address your teacher, but maybe it comes later in the day where you go up and say, hey, I didn't like what you said to her. That felt wrong to me. And if there is a punishment or a consequence behind that, that's okay, because what you do have is an advocate, an unwavering advocate in your mother. And so you're going to see certain things in the world that you're not going to agree with, and you're not even going to understand. And I can't explain away. And so how do we make sure that we hold on to this, but also that we educate ourselves and we fight to create the world? Like, I'm really hanging a lot on my kids' generation to get right. It's the same as my parents' generation and their parents' generation, to finally break this stronghold that white supremacy has on us. And by us, I don't just mean Black people, but I mean all
everybody.
people.
Come on.
So it's just, how do we do that? And that's so critical. And that's what I'm really teaching my boys and trying to get them to understand, that it's important that they not only protect themselves, but they protect and honor the people around them. And their family isn't just the people that they're born into.
Come on.
But it's the community that in
right.
which they come up. And so they may become so close with someone, and then that person may be from Pakistan, and now all of a sudden this is my brother, and you look nothing alike. It's about the familiarity that you find within that, and that comfort in that person that says, no, this is my brother, and that's wrong, and I'm going to stand up and fight.
There you go. That's
I
right.
stepped away for a second just because I used to have my camera oriented opposite from where I am now, but now I have my very front in my home behind me. And what I see in the picture that I'd love to share is this photograph of me when I was 5 years old. I'll see if I can put it up here.
Wow.
So that's me probably right there next to my sister. So the interesting thing about this photograph is that right behind me with the Bible is my grandmother, and next to her is her mother, and next to her is my mom, and my grandmother's sister on the end. But my grandmother's mother, I found out, was born in 1859. This woman was born the property of other human beings.
That's right.
Yeah. Wow.
And what weighs on me, Alicia and Victoria, is that I knew, I touched, and I was loved by a human being who suffered the indignity of not being seen as a human, but as owned property.
That's right.
Of other human beings in a system that allowed it, that supported it, that advanced the denial of humanity for a race of people, our people, Africans, right? And so I keep that in mind. And Victoria, I appreciate so much what you're saying about the role of family and belief, and the idea that we have to keep looking for a future. So I know that my great grandmother Lizzie, that was her name, probably would be just smiling at the distance we've come, and that you, Alicia, and I, and Victoria, you and I have to have the same kind of confidence about the future. What we're doing right now is so important that we are intentional. And you used the words, Alicia, I think you used the words creating the future.
Yes.
That's what we're doing. We're creating.
That's right.
Listen, with that, that's it for today. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank
We'll
you.